It was a Friday evening, and the house smelled like takeout Chinese. Sandra was in the kitchen, humming a tune I couldn't place, while I was sprawled out on the couch, flipping through channels without really watching anything. Life felt normal. Too normal. That's when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a notification or a call, it was our home security app, alerting me that the front door had just been unlocked. Odd. We were both home. Sandra, did you order something? I called out, my voice thick with disinterest. Nope, why? She replied, her tone carefree. I swiped the notification away and pulled up the live feed from our security camera. The image flickered for a second before settling on a man, a stranger, walking right through our front door like he owned the place. What the hell? I muttered, sitting up straight. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black leather jacket. He carried himself like someone who had been here before. He didn't pause or look around nervously. Instead, he took off his shoes, like someone settling in. Sandra, get over here. I barked, the urgency in my voice snapping her attention. She came rushing in, a spatula still in her hand. What's wrong? I pointed at the screen. She froze. The color drained from her face like someone had flipped a switch. Who is that? I demanded, though her reaction had already answered my question. The man walked into the living room, our living room. He stopped, looking around, then pulled out his phone and texted something. Sandra dropped the spatula, and it clattered to the floor. You've got to leave now, Matt, she stammered, not meeting my eyes. Excuse me? Just, please. I can explain, but not right now. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in, trying to pull me toward the door. But I didn't move. I was glued to the screen as the man made himself comfortable on the couch, the very same spot I had been lying on 10 minutes ago. Sandra, tell me what the hell is going on, I growled, my voice low and dangerous. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the security app. That's when I noticed it, her hands were trembling. She wasn't just scared, she was guilty. That was the moment I realized my life was no longer mine. Sandra froze in place, her lips parted slightly, as if the words were caught somewhere between her brain and her mouth. I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing with questions that I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. The man on the screen shifted slightly, pulling out his phone and typing something with a nonchalant air that infuriated me. He didn't belong here, yet he acted like this was his second home. I looked back at Sandra, and her trembling hands only confirmed what I was starting to suspect. I'll ask you one more time, Sandra, I said, my voice low but firm. Who is he? Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to me, and finally to the door, as if she was considering bolting. It's not what it looks like, she finally muttered, but the words came out weak, barely audible. Not what it looks like. There's a strange man in our living room, Sandra. So tell me, what exactly is it? Before she could respond, I marched past her and grabbed my jacket. I wasn't about to sit there and wait for her to spin some half-assed excuse. If she wasn't going to explain, I'd get my answers myself. Matt, wait! Sandra yelled, chasing after me as I stormed toward the door. She grabbed my arm, but I yanked it free without looking back. The door slammed shut behind me as I stepped into the cool evening air. My heart was pounding in my chest, not from exertion but from sheer adrenaline. This wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding, I knew that much. There was a man in my house, and my wife was clearly hiding something. I walked around to the side of the house, where I could peek through the window without being seen. The curtains were drawn halfway, giving me just enough of a view to see the man still sitting on the couch. He looked relaxed, scrolling through his phone. Sandra appeared moments later, standing awkwardly in front of him. She wasn't yelling at him to leave, wasn't calling the police. She was talking to him. My stomach churned as I watched her gestures, the way she folded her arms defensively, then threw them down in exasperation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it didn't matter. The scene told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the first time they'd been in that room together. I stayed there for what felt like hours, watching their interaction like some voyeur. I didn't care how pathetic I looked. I needed to know. At one point, the man stood up, his broad frame towering over Sandra. She stepped back, but not in fear, more like submission. Then, to my absolute disgust, he reached out and brushed her cheek with his hand. And she let him. I stepped back from the window, my breath coming in shallow bursts. My entire body felt like it was vibrating, a mix of fury and disbelief coursing through me. My mind was already racing with thoughts, scenarios, explanations, but they all led to the same conclusion: my wife was cheating on me. The front door opened, and I ducked behind a bush just in time to see the man step out. He looked around briefly before heading down the driveway toward a black car parked at the curb. I didn't follow him. My focus was on Sandra. I waited until he was gone before going back inside. Sandra was still in the living room, pacing nervously. When she saw me, her face went pale. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Enough," I said. I walked past her and sat down on the couch, the same spot where the stranger had been minutes earlier. I stared at her, waiting for her to speak, to explain. "Matt, please," she started, but her voice trailed off. "Please what?" I snapped. "Please forget that I just saw another man in our house? Please pretend everything's fine?" "No, Sandra. Start talking. Now." She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Try me." Sandra sat down in the chair opposite me, her shoulders slumped. For the first time in years, she looked small, vulnerable. "He's just a friend," she said weakly. "Don't insult me, Sandra. Friends don't come into my house uninvited and act like they own the place." "Who is he?" She hesitated again, and I felt my patience wearing thin. "His name is Darren," she finally admitted. He's someone I met at the barber shop." "And?" I pressed. "And, we've been talking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Talking?" I repeated, my hands gripping the armrest so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Is that all?" She didn't answer. Her silence was deafening. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "Not long," she said quickly. "A few weeks, maybe." I laughed bitterly. "A few weeks. Right. And in those few weeks, he's already comfortable enough to stroll into my house? Cut the crap, Sandra. Tell me the truth." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice breaking. "Then tell me what it is." I shouted, my anger finally boiling over. Sandra buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. For a moment, I just sat there, watching her. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her we could work through this. But a larger part of me wanted answers. Finally, she looked up, her face streaked with tears. "We kissed," she admitted. "That's all, I swear." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. "A kiss." She thought that would make it better, like it was some minor indiscretion that could be forgiven with a few tears and a half-assed apology. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and steady. Sandra's eyes widened. "What?" I said. "Get out," I repeated. "Go stay with a friend, with Darren, with whoever the hell you want." "But you're not staying here tonight." "Matt, please," she begged, but I was already standing, pointing toward the door. "Out," I said again, my voice leaving no room for argument. She hesitated for a moment before grabbing her coat and leaving without another word. As the door closed behind her, I sat back down on the couch, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. My wife was cheating on me. My marriage was over. And this was just the beginning. Sandra didn't come back that night. I didn't call or text her, and she didn't bother reaching out to me either. Good. It gave me the chance to think about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to approach this mess. By the next morning, though, my anger hadn't subsided, it had only sharpened. When she finally walked through the door late Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at the dining table, waiting. Her clothes were different from the ones she had been wearing the night before, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She didn't look at me as she stepped inside. "You decided to come back," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. Sandra froze in the doorway, then slowly turned to face me. I didn't know where else to go. I gestured for her to sit down. "Good. Then let's talk." She hesitated but eventually took a seat across from me. The table felt like a battlefield, and I wasn't in the mood to show any mercy. "Start from the beginning," I said. "And don't leave anything out this time. Who is Darren, how did you meet him, and what exactly has been going on?" Sandra clasped her hands tightly in front of her, her eyes focused on the table as if avoiding my gaze would somehow lessen the weight of her words. "I told you the truth last night," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met him at the barber shop. He came in as a client a couple of months ago. He started coming back more often, and we got to talking." "That's it." "Talking," I repeated, my tone dripping with skepticism. "That's the word you keep using, but last night didn't look like just talking to me. You're going to have to do better than that, Sandra." Her hands trembled as she continued. "We connected, okay? He would come in, and we'd talk about things. His life, my life. He's divorced. He understood things I was feeling. Things I didn't know how to talk to you about." I leaned forward, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "So instead of talking to me, your husband, you decided to talk to him? To invite him into my house?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, finally meeting my eyes. "I didn't invite him here. He showed up on his own. And you just let him in?" I didn't know what else to do. Her voice cracked, and she looked away again. I could feel my jaw tightening as the pieces of her story fell into place. She was deflecting, trying to minimize her actions, but it wasn't working. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked bluntly. Sandra's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "No. I swear, I didn't." "You expect me to believe that?" "Yes, because it's the truth." I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deceit. Her words might have been convincing, but her actions told a different story. "Do you think it matters whether or not you slept with him?" I asked. "You let him into our lives, Sandra. Into our house. That's betrayal, no matter how you try to spin it." She flinched at my words but didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "Why, Sandra?" I finally asked. "What was so wrong with our marriage that you felt the need to turn to someone else?" Tears filled her eyes as she struggled to find the right words. "I don't know," she admitted. I felt like we were drifting apart. Like you didn't see me anymore." I let out a bitter laugh. "So your solution was to cheat?" "It wasn't like that," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't sit there and act like this was some accident. You made a choice, Sandra. And now you're dealing with the consequences." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. This wasn't about her pain, it was about the damage she had done to us. "Do you even love me anymore?" I asked. "Yes," she exclaimed, her voice desperate. "I love you, Matt. I love you more than anything." I shook my head. "You've got a funny way of showing it." "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Her words might have carried more weight if they hadn't come after her betrayal. But now? They felt empty, hollow. "Why should I believe you?" I asked. "Why should I give you another chance after what you've done?" "Because I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I'll go to counseling. I'll cut off all contact with Darren. I'll do anything, Matt. Just, please don't give up on us." Her plea hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered it. But the image of Darren sitting in our living room, his hand on her cheek, was seared into my memory. Forgiveness felt like an impossibility. I need time, I finally said, my voice cold. Time to figure out what I want. What I can live with. Sandra nodded, her tears still falling. I understand, she whispered. Good, I said, standing up. Because right now, I don't even know if I can look at you. I left her sitting at the table, her sobs echoing through the house as I walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. Sandra stayed in the guest room. I'd told her not to set foot in our bedroom. It was my space now, at least for as long as we were both under the same roof. But I couldn't shake the anger or the humiliation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man in my living room. My home. I wasn't just furious at Sandra. I was furious at myself. For trusting her. For not seeing the signs earlier. For letting this happen. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. If she thought she could betray me and get away with it, she was wrong. It was time to take back control of my life and my dignity. I started with her car. Sandra loved her little red Honda Civic like it was her baby. She kept it spotless, inside and out. I knew she had a hair appointment at the barbershop later in the day. Perfect. After she left for work that morning, I grabbed a stack of post-it notes from the office and walked out to the driveway. I carefully wrote cheater on each note and stuck them all over her car windows, doors, mirrors, even the roof. By the time I was done, her precious Honda looked like a mobile billboard advertising her infidelity. I didn't stop there. I snapped a picture of the car and posted it on our neighborhood's private Facebook group. The caption read, * caught my wife cheating. Thought the community should know what kind of person she is. *. It didn't take long for the comments to roll in. Some people were sympathetic, others were gleefully piling on the judgment. It wasn't my proudest moment, but at that point, I didn't care. She wanted to make a fool out of me? Fine. I'd return the favor. When Sandra got home that evening, she was livid. What the hell did you do to my car? She screamed as she burst through the door. I made some upgrades, I said calmly, not even looking up from my laptop. This isn't funny, Matt, she yelled. You're humiliating me. Good, I said, finally meeting her gaze. Now you know how it feels. She stormed off, slamming the guest room door behind her. But I wasn't done yet. The next day, I went through our finances. Sandra and I had always kept joint accounts, something I now regretted. I made a list of all the subscriptions and services she loved, her gym membership, her Hulu account, her monthly haircare box. Then I canceled every single one of them. That evening, she came into the living room, looking furious but trying to keep her composure. Why can't I log into Hulu? She asked. Because I canceled it, I said without hesitation. Her face turned red. You canceled it? Why would you do that? Because I'm not paying for anything that benefits you anymore, I said. If you want Hulu, pay for it yourself. This is petty, Matt, she snapped. No, Sandra, I said, standing up. What's petty is sneaking around with some other guy while pretending to love me. This is me taking back what's mine. She didn't have a response to that. She just stared at me, her anger slowly giving way to something else, something like regret. But regret wasn't enough. The following weekend, I started packing up her things. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, all of it. I didn't throw them out, I wasn't that cruel, but I boxed everything up and left it in the garage. When Sandra saw the boxes, she looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. What are you doing? She asked, her voice trembling. Giving you a head start, I said simply. I figure it's only a matter of time before you're out of here for good. Might as well make it easier for you. Matt, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. Just give me a chance. I stared at her, my heart a conflicted mess. Part of me wanted to believe her, to let her back in and try to rebuild what we had. But the other part, the part that remembered the look on Darren's face as he sat on my couch, couldn't let go. "I don't know if I can do that, Sandra," I said finally. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just nodded, her shoulders slumping as she walked away. I thought that would be the end of it, but Sandra had one more card to play. 2 days later, she showed up at my workplace. She waited for me outside the office building, holding a small box in her hands. When I walked out, she approached me cautiously. "What are you doing here?" I asked, more annoyed than anything else. "I brought you this," she said, holding out the box. I took it reluctantly and opened it to find a handwritten letter and a photo of us from our wedding day. I want you to remember what we had," she said, her voice shaking. "Before all of this." I looked at the photo, then back at her. "I don't need a photo to remember," I said coldly. "But thanks for the reminder of what you threw away." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, then turned and walked away without another word. As I watched her go, I felt a pang of something, guilt, maybe? Regret? I wasn't sure. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Sandra avoided me after the incident at work. Days passed with nothing more than the occasional awkward exchange over household logistics. The tension in the air was suffocating, but I wasn't ready to let it go. I needed clarity, closure, something that would allow me to move forward without questions gnawing at my mind. A week later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I decided it was time. I walked into the guest room without knocking, catching Sandra by surprise as she sat cross-legged on the bed, staring at her phone. "We need to talk," I said firmly. She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and puffy, likely from another night of crying. "About what?" she asked, though we both knew the answer. "About us." "About what happens next," I replied, pulling up a chair and sitting across from her. "We can't keep living like this, avoiding each other, pretending everything's fine. It's not." Sandra set her phone down and nodded, her expression resigned. "I know." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Why, Sandra? Why did you do it? Was it me? Was I not enough for you?" Her lips trembled as she struggled to find the right words. "It wasn't about you, Matt. It was never about you." "Then what?" I demanded. "What excuse could possibly justify what you did?" She hesitated, then finally spoke. "I felt invisible, okay? I felt like I was just existing. You were always busy with work, with your projects. I tried to talk to you about how I felt, but it never seemed to matter." "That's bullshit," I snapped, my anger flaring. "You're blaming this on me? On the fact that I worked hard to provide for us? That I trusted you enough to not second-guess your every move?" "It's not an excuse," she said quickly. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I betrayed you. But I wasn't thinking clearly. Darren made me feel seen." "Seen?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Is that what you call sneaking around with another man behind my back? Feeling seen?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I refused to let her off the hook. "Do you even realize what you've done to me, to us? You took everything we built, everything we stood for, and threw it away for what? Some fleeting moment of attention?" "I know I messed up," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. But Matt, I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." "Love?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call this? Love? Because it sure as hell doesn't feel like it." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I wanted to feel something, pity, empathy, anything, but all I felt was anger and emptiness. "I want a divorce," I said bluntly, cutting through her sobs like a knife. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "This marriage is over, Sandra. I can't do this anymore. I can't trust you, and without trust, there's nothing left." "No, Matt, please," she begged, sliding off the bed and kneeling in front of me. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it together. Please, just give me a chance. I stood up, looking down at her with a mix of anger and pity. I already gave you a chance, Sandra. 12 years of chances. And you threw it all away the moment you let him into our lives. I made a mistake, she said desperately, clutching at my hands. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, Matt. Don't give up on us. Her pleas tugged at something deep inside me, but it wasn't enough. The damage was done, and there was no going back. I can't, I said, pulling my hands away. I've made up my mind. She collapsed onto the floor, her sobs echoing through the room as I walked out. Over the next few days, I started the process of filing for divorce. Sandra tried to fight it at first, begging and pleading for another chance. But eventually, she realized that I wasn't going to change my mind. The final conversation came 2 weeks later, on the night she packed her bags to leave. She stood in the doorway, her suitcase by her side, and looked at me with tear-filled eyes. I'm sorry, she said softly. I nodded, my expression unreadable. I know. I never wanted it to end like this, she continued. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I replied. And now we both have to live with the consequences. She hesitated, as if there was more she wanted to say, but instead, she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. The house felt quieter, lonelier, but also lighter somehow. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. After Sandra walked out that night, I closed the door behind her and stood there for a long moment. The silence of the house felt oppressive, but also final. It was done. I was free of her and the betrayal she brought into my life. Or so I thought. The days that followed were oddly mechanical. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, and stared at the TV without really watching anything. The motions of daily life continued, but I was operating on autopilot. At first, it felt like a small victory, a sign that I was moving forward. But the quiet moments, the ones where there was no noise to distract me, were unbearable. That's when the doubts began creeping in. Had I been too harsh? Should I have given her another chance? Was there something I could have done differently? These questions haunted me, not because I wanted her back, but because I needed to understand why everything had fallen apart. I spent hours combing through the past, replaying conversations, analyzing decisions, searching for the moment where things had gone wrong. Had I really been distant? Had I ignored her needs? Or was this all just a convenient excuse for her selfish choices? One day, as I was cleaning out the guest room Sandra had been staying in, I found something unexpected, a journal. It was buried under a pile of clothes she hadn't bothered to take with her. At first, I wasn't sure if I should read it, but curiosity got the better of me. Flipping through the pages, I saw snippets of her thoughts from the past year. Some entries were mundane, complaints about work, notes about appointments, but others revealed a side of her I hadn't seen. Matt works so hard, but sometimes I feel like he doesn't see me anymore. Like I'm just part of the furniture in our house. I hate that I'm feeling this way, but Darren makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. It's wrong, but I can't stop myself. Reading her words was like being punched in the gut all over again. But instead of anger, I felt something else, sadness. Not for her, but for what we'd lost. The journal didn't justify her actions. It didn't excuse the lies or the betrayal. But it did paint a clearer picture of a marriage that had been unraveling long before Darren showed up. I spent the next few weeks re-evaluating everything. I didn't regret the divorce, the decision was final. But I wanted to understand what had happened so I wouldn't carry the same baggage into the future. I started therapy, something I never thought I'd do. At first, it felt strange talking to a stranger about the most personal aspects of my life. But the therapist helped me see things from a perspective I hadn't considered before. Yes, Sandra made terrible choices, she said during one session. But relationships don't fall apart in a vacuum. There were likely cracks forming long before the affair. If you can identify those cracks, you can avoid them in the future. She was right. I had been working too much, spending long hours at the job and coming home too tired to engage with Sandra. I'd taken her for granted, assuming she'd always be there, always be happy. But none of that excused what she did. One afternoon, a few months after Sandra moved out, I got a call from her. It was the first time we'd spoken since the divorce papers were signed. "Hey, Matt," she said hesitantly. I wanted to check in. See how you're doing." "I'm fine," I replied curtly. "What do you want, Sandra?" There was a pause before she answered. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I've already heard it, Sandra. Saying it again doesn't change what happened." "I know," she said softly. I don't want you to hate me." "I don't hate you," I said after a long silence. "But I don't forgive you either. Not yet." "That's fair," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I hope someday you will." "Maybe," I said. "But don't wait for it." After we hung up, I felt a surprising sense of closure. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward letting go. Life gradually started to improve. I threw myself into work, but not as an escape this time. I set boundaries, made time for myself, and even started going out with friends again. One evening, while grabbing a drink with a coworker, she asked me if I'd ever consider dating again. "Maybe," I said with a shrug. "But not right now. I've got enough on my plate without adding someone else to it." She laughed. "Fair enough. Just don't close yourself off completely, okay?" I nodded, knowing she was right. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like a different person. Not better, not worse, just different. I'd learned a lot about myself, about relationships, and about what I wanted in life. Sandra's betrayal had been a painful chapter, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one.